Welcome everyone. We are just letting everyone filter into the Zoom room. Thank you so much for being here this evening. We are going to start very soon. Hello, welcome. Welcome to those of you from York St John's, staff and students, and welcome to those members of the public who have joined us. We really appreciate you spending your Wednesday evening with us, and we're really looking forward to an exciting conversation. Okay, so we've reached a pretty good number of participants there, but it's still going up. I might just start by introducing myself. If you don't know me, my name is Dr. Rebecca Tomash, and I am a lecturer in creative writing at York St John University. And I'm really honoured to be hosting this event tonight, which is, part of our kind of creative writing offering, thinking around independent publishing in the UK, and different routes into publishing and writing for students and for the public as well. So thanks again for being here. How tonight is going to run is that for the first half of the event, which should last around an hour and a half, maximum an hour and 40 minutes, is that I will be asking questions and talking with our fantastic panelists. And then there will be lots and lots of time for you all in the audience to ask questions of our panelists as well. It's really important to say that that is at the heart of tonight's event, is a chance for us to all kind of as a community share, have discussion. So at any point, if a question comes to your mind, please put it in the Q&A and we will come to it in the question section. And I'm going to keep saying that because I just want to make sure that everyone has a chance to ask everything that they want to ask. Okay, so I'm just having a look at the participants list here. Okay, excuse me. I think I'm going to get started. If you've just joined us, one more reminder that at any point, if you have a question for any or all of our panelists, please write it in the Q&A. I will come to it in the Q&A section. So you can just post it at any point you want and I'll come to it and I'll attend to it. So yeah, please ask as many questions as you want to do. So the first thing that I'm going to do is introduce our presses and introduce our panelists to give you an idea of who we're going to be talking to tonight. I just want to start with an apology, which is that unfortunately Deborah Smith, who edits Tilted Axis, hasn't as yet been able to join the event. We're hoping that they will be able to join us as the evening goes on. So hopefully we will be joined by Deborah soon, but I will focus on who we have right now. So just to start here. So the first press and panelist that I want to introduce is Jacob Ross from Peepal Tree Press. Peepal Tree was, excuse me, founded in 1985 and it's based in Leeds. It aims to bring readers the very best of international writing from the Caribbean, its diasporas and the UK. Their goal is always to publish books that make a difference, and though they always want to achieve the best possible sales, they're most concerned with whether a book will still be alive in the future. Peepal Tree are involved in many literature-related projects, including Inscribe, which supports writers of colour in England to professionally advance their creative work and their careers through coaching, mentoring, workshop, residentials, training, newsletters, publications, and general advice. And tonight we're joined by Jacob Ross, who is the Associate Fiction Editor at Peepal Tree Press. He's the author of several story collections and editor of 5 short story anthologies. His 2016 novel, The Bone Readers, won the inaugural Jalak Prize and was shortlisted for the Association of Caribbean Writers Award. Jacob's new novel, Black Rain Falling, was published by Hachette in March 2020. And I think that just touches on some of the really interesting achievements that we don't have more time to talk about. But that is Peepal Tree Press. We are also joined by Emma Dai'an Wright from the Emma Press. The Emma Press specialises in poetry, short stories, children's books and translations. The Emma Press has published over 500 writers across more than 100 books and was recently awarded funding from Arts Council England through the Elevate programme, helping diverse-led arts organisations to build resilience. The Emma Press is a BAME-led feminist radical organisation keen on making poetry, publishing and literature as welcoming and accessible as possible. They're committed to breaking down traditional, elitist and exclusionary structures through providing opportunities for publication for writers and illustrators, through creating books which reflect as many people's experiences as possible, and sharing publishing knowledge. And as I said, we're joined by the founder of the Emma Press, Emma, who is a British, Chinese, Vietnamese publisher based in Birmingham. Thank you so much for being here. We are also joined by Hadja Press and the two founders, publishers and editors, Farhana Arefin and Brekna Aftab. Hadja Press is an independent and proudly political publishing house run by and for people of colour. Hadja Press publishes books by writers of colour with original and transformative ways of seeing, imagining and remaking our world. While people of colour are sidelined, both in the notoriously exclusive and hierarchical world of publishing and in many conversations on the left, the press rejects the lukewarm tokenism of diversity as a solution. Instead, they seek to address structural inequalities, critically speaking and writing on their own terms, and using their voices to attack power, not to create the same elite with browner faces. Community and solidarity are central to the vision of Hadja Press, and their publications aim to challenge, connect, and inspire their readers and writers to dream of and create another world together. So hopefully that has given you an idea, if you didn't already know, of the kind of story and the journey of these amazing presses. And I'm really looking forward to talking to them and finding out more. I'm going to talk about publishing. I'm going to kind of move through different publishing topics, but if you think that there's anything that hasn't been mentioned in the audience, please put it in the Q&A. So I wanted to start with a bit of a reflection on all of your different experiences with the different presses that you either founded or work with. Peepal Tree, for example, has been around since 1985. It has such a long history. The Emma Press was founded in 2012. Tilted Axis, which is the press of Deborah, if they can join us, was founded in 2015. And Hadja Press was, I believe, founded in 2020. Is that right? Yeah. So there's such a span here of kind of different journeys. And I wanted to begin by kind of getting thoughts from each of you, either in your positions as editors or press founders or both. What have you learned from your time at your press about what makes an independent publisher successful? And I just want to clarify, when I say success there, I don't mean massive book sales and prizes necessarily. I mean successful in the sense of finding and attracting dedicated readers, or indeed writers, finding the right writers for whom, who mean a huge amount to that press, and readers, for whom those books also mean a huge amount. How do you make an independent UK press work in a climate that's so competitive for book sales, but also readers' eyeballs? So I'm just curious on your concepts of success and what you think you've learned about that. Perhaps, is there anyone that would like to start? Could we maybe start with Emma?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And also it's really exciting and wonderful to be here and chatting about it. And thank you to everyone who's watching. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about success and what that means recently. I guess what you said about attracting kind of authors makes me think of how I often think about how lucky I am that a lot of the authors I started working with back in 2013 was when the first books came out. So I started in 2012 and then I kind of launched calls for submissions in 2013. A lot of the authors I met and encountered and published then, I still work with now. And I think that's quite telling. And I think, well, is that a coincidence or is it because of how I approach things? And the first call for submissions I did was for an anthology of mildly erotic verse, which was an interesting way of launching a press and introducing it to people. But I think it was that vulnerability and that kind of very idiosyncratic approach of kind of something specifically that I wanted to do and I was interested in. I think that spoke to people, and I think it kind of caused various people to reach out to me, whether they were sending poems in or whether they were just reaching out and saying, I'm interested in what you were doing. Maybe I've got some publishing experience. Should we have a chat? So looking back, as I've been kind of reflecting a lot recently, I think it was something to do with starting in a very raw, open way that kind of, I guess, gave people a very honest view of what the Emma Press was. And because it was so much me, I think that's kind of stayed the same the whole way through. So actually that was quite a consistent thing that I established from the start of the mission statement, even though I didn't see it as that at the time. And that's meant that I've had been lots of ups and downs, but overall, I feel like I've had a really nice journey. I've met so many nice people. And again, I've been reflecting because I'm just kind of on my own at the moment in my flat. So I'm just kind of thinking about, in a way, I'm connected to so many lovely people. And I've had so many interesting adventures and journeys all the way through in times when I could travel. So I think there must have been something to do with starting in a very honest and open way. That's my thought.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to jump in with their thoughts? I can pick on people, though obviously absolutely no pressure to answer any of the questions. But Jacob, I was wondering if you had thoughts. Oh, sorry, I'll come back to you, Jacob. Bregna, you had a thought.
I'm happy to answer. Yeah, I'm happy to answer. I was just...
Jacob, you go ahead first, and then I can come back and say a little bit about Hajar's success.
Is channeling. Oh, sorry. I mean, yeah, okay. In a way, I'm sort of channeling the point of view and the vision of the managing editor, Jeremy Pointing, whose press Peepal Tree Press is, and so on. And if there is one thing I can say about, in fact, there are many things I can say that account for the success of that particular press, is one is a sort of relentless determination.
Sorry, Jacob, I think we've lost you there.
Relentless determination. And
You're back.
Oh, you're hearing me at all? No?
Yeah, we're hearing you.
I'm sorry. I said, it's a relentless determination. It's having a very clear vision. It's being very aware of what one wants to achieve, what one wants to do, the areas of concern or of interest. And I also think that it's focusing, as Peepal Tree Press has done from its very inception, is to be literally uncompromising in terms of the quality of the work that's produced, a willingness to be open and quite democratic with writers, a kind of inclusiveness that is rather difficult to find in the larger presses. I mean, I've been published by some of the mainstream press, and I know the dynamic is different. And I think that as a small publisher or an independent publisher, what Peepal Tree Press has always had is an openness. It's first of all a closeness to the writers, an openness to their ideas, and a willingness to take a very good book and work with the writers in a developmental way towards giving that book its fullest possible expression. So that's largely what I think accounts for it. But I always credit Jeremy Pointing for that determination. He has been at it since 1985, at great expense to himself, and in terms of, he began with just a lighter press, just those manual things you did, and now everybody knows about Peepal Tree Press almost as a result of recent achievements. So I think it's vision, and one last, an awareness of what the gaps are. I would suggest that almost every one of us here, we write for a particular kind of audience, and our literatures are very, 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 we focused on, we know what the gaps are, what the big publishers aren't doing, and what we think need to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes complete sense. Thank you so much, Jacob. That's really interesting. Bregna, you want to add to that and share thoughts from your perspective?
Definitely. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for organizing this, Rebecca. It's such an honor to be here alongside such great publishers. So I think to talk about what success means for Hajar, it probably makes sense to say a little bit about why we set up Hajar and what it means. And the main reason why Farhana and I set up Hajar is because there was the glaring issue of how white the publishing industry is and how that impacts the books that are published. And mainstream publishing had been gesturing towards diversity for a long time, but yet nothing really seemed to change. And so that really energized us to want to build something completely new. And I think at this point, it's really important to emphasize the kind of political part of our vision. Hajar is, absolutely not neutral. We take a very clear position on, racism, on capitalism, on Palestine, on abolition, and we don't shy away from that. And so when Farhana and I were setting up Hajar, it wasn't really difficult to articulate what we wanted because there was so clearly a need for it. And so really our aim is to create like this list of books that archives our stories and experiments with possibilities of changing our world and build a generative and a healing community in the process. And both of us always say this to each other in private, that, we feel like this is a gift to our ancestors and our children so that our stories aren't erased again. In terms of writing, we want to publish books by writers of color that combine that political engagement with literary innovation. There is a line that both of us always use when describing Hajar's work, that there's no either or between beautiful and revolutionary. And I think that really captures our list accurately. And growing that sort of constellation and body of literature is success to us.
That's really eloquently described and fascinating. Thank you so much. Farhana, is there anything that you wanted to add there?
It's really difficult to to follow that. Thank you again, Rebecca, for hosting this session, and thanks to all of the participants and everyone who's here. Yeah, I mean, Breton has basically captured everything that we're about. I suppose in terms of what success means to us, obviously we're still in very early days. Our first book is going to be published tomorrow, which is very exciting. We set up just under a year ago. And we're still learning from all of the kind of presses that have set up before us and from our readers and from our writers, what success would mean. But one element that I think is really important to foreground for us is really what you were saying right at the beginning, Rebecca, which is that the kind of thing that everyone goes into publishing to do, and the thing that we want to do is to connect with people and to connect people through books. And sadly, that's a very difficult thing to do in an industry with so many commercial pressures. And I think one thing that we found, we both have backgrounds in independent publishing. So we're kind of outside the belly of the beast of publishing in a way. So in our kind of careers, we've seen the damaging effects of kind of corporatization and things like that from the outside rather than from the inside. But one thing that we kind of know is quite lacking at kind of the big five publishers often, or just kind of mainstream publishing, is that sense of community. And I mean that in kind of every sense, really. So even as Jacob was saying, if you're published by a bigger publisher, even the relationship that you have with your editor is going to be a bit less intimate than you would get at a smaller press. And then obviously there's the relationship between writers and readers, between writers and each other, even if they're published by the same publishing house. Often there's not really any opportunity for writers to kind of interact with each other and feel like they're part of a community under one publishing house. And readers as well, for them to kind of get together and share books and feel like they have a relationship with each other and with the publisher, because often, and also with independent bookshops or wherever they're getting their books from, often it's a very kind of individualized thing that you publish, that you purchase one book. So yeah, so we were kind of trying to think of different ways to build community in kind of all of these different arenas. And obviously we were doing so under the circumstances of a global pandemic, when community means something completely different. And so it's been an interesting experience. I think that a lot of things haven't gone the way that we thought, and a lot of things have gone better than what we would have thought. So for example, not being able to meet each other very often is a big thing, which has which wouldn't have been what we would have expected. But then also we have events like this, so many things that can happen online more easily than can happen in person. So we're really just kind of trying to grow this community around our list and have people connect with each other through Hajar. And I think that that would be kind of success for us.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much all for having such kind of subtle and sophisticated reflections to kind of think through about what success means, because I think these are questions that often come up for anyone that's involved in writing or publishing or who aspires to be, is what does success actually mean within your own remit, rather than the success that's kind of forced on us by kind of capitalistic, not just publishing industry, but kind of worldview that encourages us to see success in a very narrow way. So it's just so interesting and kind of nourishing to hear that from all of you. My next question, I think, does flow into some of the things that has been mentioned so far, because obviously something that I kind of can't avoid thinking about is the fact that all of your presses in different ways seem committed to breaking down the kind of traditionally white, heteropatriarchal, privileged nature of British publishing, whether that is centering Caribbean writers, whether that is centering writers of colour, queer writers, working class writers, trying to find a way to also, bring those who, don't have huge privilege into the publishing world, and also find the amazing voices that kind of aren't being appreciated. And I'm just interested whether you could reflect on the experience of challenging the UK's publishing hierarchies, and also to consider whether you think that positive changes are being seen in the industry. If so, what are they? And if not, or if not much, what needs to be done? And I appreciate that these questions will be very different depending on when you started your press, and the challenges, might be kind of very fresh, or they might be something you've been working on for a long time. But if I know that even for the newest press, you worked in publishing previously, so obviously, Hajar Press, for example, you both worked in publishing and you have a lot of knowledge kind of around these areas. I'm not going to go through and make each of you answer, but if anyone, does have thoughts on attempting to challenge the hierarchies within publishing, I'd be really interested to hear that. Thank you so much.
I'm sort of deferring to.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to just unmute and go.
This to show that men tend to jump in and literally dominate the stage, and I don't ever want to be guilty of that. I've been properly trained by my daughter. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Jacob.
So, yeah. So anybody else? I'm happy to jump in, but
I can say something to make Jacob feel better.
Thank you.
Thanks,
yeah, I was thinking about that. Oh, your answers are all so good. I was thinking about how I've always wanted to challenge everything, but my approach has been kind of almost veiled in that it's really important to me for things not to be a big deal, because I think eventually at some point in the future, it shouldn't be a big deal, but just right now we're trying to push things and change things up. So I've kind of deliberately done that from the start in the kind of the Emma Press bubble, where I'm trying to behave like I would like things to be. So I guess part of that means, I don't know, my feeling about bigger publishing is that if there's a thing about you, you have to write about it. It's got to be addressed. And I think that's something which I really don't like, especially as people are complex, and you're not just one thing, the thing that's kind of unusual in big publishing. And so I guess it's very important to me that writers can just be, and I think that's kind of a feeling about myself as well. I just want to be, and actually just me being a publisher and being a gatekeeper is important. And I put a lot of pressure on myself to be the best I can, but at the same time, I have to remind myself that actually just existing, just doing the Emma Press, just deciding what to publish is significant. And I think the same for writers. So whether writers want to address things, political things directly, or whether they just want to write about something that's completely kind of almost feels separate to direct politics, and yet just is. I think that's important too. So like, yeah, I wonder how it looks from the outside about what I'm doing, and there's a lot of thought in the background to try and create a place where writers can just be and can express themselves, and where readers can hopefully find somewhere, can find books that resonate with them as well. Yeah, that's quite a muddled answer. Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's not. It's not at all. And I mean, I'm going to try not to talk too much, but I just thought it's interesting what you're saying about just the very fact that you're there. It also made me think about something that I feel like has been mentioned earlier, which is that sense of community, and that a writer can come to you, kind of whatever position they're writing from, and kind of know they're going to find a space of care, rather than potentially be kind of eaten up and used, you know, in a system that's not necessarily there to kind of support their well-being as an entire human being, and not just as a writer. So I think that's a really interesting idea. Jacob, were you going to say something?
Yeah, well, I was very much involved in the cultural politics of this country from the early 1990s onward. And one of the first things, I arrived in this country in my 20s. So I came as an adult, and coming from a cultural space, which is the Caribbean, you can't help but notice the contrast, the difference in terms of how one gets perceived. First of all, I moved from a population where one didn't take it, one took for granted that we were all kind of, people living on the planet, to becoming a minority. And that possessed enormous implications. And from the moment I arrived here, I got involved in what you may refer to as arts activism, largely because it was so obvious that the voices of the minoritized people in this country, be it at the level of sexuality, be it at the level of gender, be it at the level of race, it was so much in your face. And I came here with fresh eyes. So it's not as if I was so immersed in it that I became inured to it. I really saw it and I lived it. And I began I became editor of a very important cultural product that we called Outrage magazine, which was a big magazine in the 1980s, and that got destroyed quite briefly. But just to give you a quick idea as to the kinds of struggles that Black and minoritized people in this country have been facing. For example, in 2004, that's 17 years ago, a report came out called In Full Color, where you had artists, Black writers, decrying the kind of narrative hegemony that was, in a way, that we lived on the five big publishers, and don't forget that not long before that, in the 1960s and so on, there were 24 mid-sized publishers, which were all merged. Some of them were asset stripped, but they were these 4 or 5, and no longer in the writers. The primary objective was in books, and in profit. And it completely changed and the landscape for us. And we still are living with it today. So there was a report in 2004. There was one in 2005 called Free Verse. There was one in 2015 called Writing the Future. Another one called Freed Verse in 2017. And one came out just a couple of years ago, done by Goldsmiths University of London, under the, by these writers. And in that, it was a very comprehensive look at what was really happening within the wider publishing industry outside of the independent spaces, independent publishers. And it's shocking. I advise anybody to get that report and to get a state of publishing in this country, a sense of it, look at what's happening, and so on. And I can go on forever about this because it's a big subject in my head. What publishers like ourselves, not just Peepal Tree Press, ourselves, we tend to do is to publish, if you like, all of the voices that are so important, that are so fundamental to understanding what it means to be British, right? That it is not just this single hegemonic thing as you get thrown out in our faces occasionally, because there's a massive cultural war happening right now around the whole idea of Britishness. And we are saying basically we are here too, and these are our voices and they're valid. And that is really what we are about as a collective of independent publishers. We don't necessarily interact as much as we might, but I know of the existence of, once you tell me you're independent, you're an independent publisher, I know automatically what your politics are. It's alternative, it's questioning, it's subversive, it's digressive, right? And it takes no hostages. I know that already. You didn't even have to tell me what your publishing house's biography is. I know that from the time you say that you're independent as a publisher, and we are necessary for this landscape. Maybe somebody will ask later on, what do I mean by that? But we are absolutely necessary for this, because the only authentic voices that you have, well, that's not true, but the genuinely authentic voices that are coming out of this literary space right now are coming from the independent sector for very good reason, which I can again explain to you later on. So I'm passionate about it, as you can see. And I think that we're doing a brilliant job.
Yeah, I'm agreed. Absolutely. That's, again, thank you so much for so eloquently sharing those thoughts about what the independent kind of scene is capable of, but also that unbelievable history of kind of struggle, but also of creativity, creation, originality that is just, beautiful and, kind of something incredibly special. Brekna or Farhana, is there anything that you would like to add from a Hajar Press perspective, either in response to anything that Emma and Jacob said, or in response to my original question about the challenges of challenging hierarchies within publishing?
I'm just so thankful to both Emma and Jacob for saying those things. It was like you were kind of channeling exactly what I wanted to say. So I think in response to the question about kind of traditional publishing and challenges, I think that one of the big things that Brekna and I were looking at when we were thinking of setting up Hajar Press were exactly those reports that Jacob mentioned, which have been coming out and saying exactly the same thing every couple of years for decades. And there was actually a big report, I can't remember its name, I think it's probably the one Jacob was referencing, which was by several different authors that came out kind of at some point last year. And yeah, Jacob's completely right. Some of the things that are said are just horrific. And one of the kind of recurring themes, so this was a report which kind of collated different kind of anonymized testimonies from people working within commercial publishing about, for example, how they choose to market a certain book if the author is, say, a person of color, or if the author is working class, or how they choose to commission a certain book, or questions like that. And one of the recurring things that we saw is that it's the commercial pressures of the industry that kind of force it to be this way, and it's very, very structural. And so what kind of emerged is that the industry, and people have known this for ages, the industry is very stuck in kind of replicating its own problems, because of the fact that you have to publish something that you think will sell. And how do you decide whether you think it will sell? You'll see if something similar to it sold before. And that's basically how most publishers do choose what to publish. So it's always kind of focusing on previous success stories and trying to just do them again. And one thing which kind of bounces off what Emma was saying earlier about just wanting to create a space for writers to be, is that it means that, especially if you've kind of got some kind of marginalized identity or disadvantage, or just, minoritized identity, you're not really able to kind of do something new, because you're already put into like a niche. You're already kind of seen as, say, a Black writer or a working class writer, and then you're compared to other people who are Black writers or working class writers, and you don't get to just do something really experimental, because people don't know if that's going to sell or not. And so what Brekna and I really wanted to do was essentially give people of color the space to really do exactly what Emma was saying, which is just write what they want to write, and not tailor it to what they think a publisher is looking for, or what kind of the industry is looking for, or what readers, what kind of mass readerships or like general readerships are looking for, but just to kind of experiment to write things that that they wouldn't necessarily get the chance to present to agents or publishers otherwise. And to us, it's actually quite like a win-win situation, because despite the fact that we are actually going against these commercial pressures, we think that it produces the best kind of writing. So hopefully it will sell anyway, even if that's not our aim, because it just creates this beautiful space for people to express themselves creatively. So yeah.
That's so interesting, thank you. And Bretna, do you want to add to that, or has Farhana covered it pretty much?
I'll just say something very briefly. So this isn't, something that Hajar alone can address, but I think that we all, as a wider industry, have to have a conversation about, and it's, we can talk as much as we like about publishing a plurality of voices, but you have to look at, who works in mainstream publishing as well. And for years, you've had unpaid internships, and who can afford to live in a city like London, where most of publishing today is concentrated? Who can afford to live in a city that's this expensive doing something like that? And these sort of, exclusive structural practices in the wider industry really need to be talked about and addressed. And I think, there was sorry, this is going to be a bit muddled, but aside from that, there was this thread on Twitter that was critiquing this other thread on Twitter about how, it was this whole thing about, people of color writers aren't confident enough to go to publishers. And this person was saying, it's absolutely not about that. It's about people of color not being able to trust a publication to go to it. We've been around for a year and we've had many, many proposals and, really brilliant ones. And it's the publisher's responsibility to actually develop that plurality of voices and reach out to those communities. That's on the publisher. And yeah, so I would say that there's kind of structural issues around hiring as well. And then there's always the elephant in the room, that's Amazon. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you both so much. Yes, and I think it's really important, as you say, to kind of always be drawing attention to the fact that the opportunities for writers, as you say, are created by the publishers. And that is partly about what they do and the actions they take, but it's also about who they literally are, who's working for them, who's behind the scenes, who has the power, in those kind of scenarios. And also, I think it's really interesting, and if I have time to talk about this a bit more later, that you also talked about the kind of economic kind of inequalities that come also from the kind of centering of publishing around London. And of course, as you can imagine, though we're going to have people hopefully watching this from all over the country and beyond, the university that I work at is in the north, it's in York, and it's something that our students have to confront often, which is how do they make a career and a life for themselves in their home area? Why should they feel forced to move to London if that's not something they particularly want to do, away from family and friends and away from actually, of course, the kind of creative networks that they've built just to work in a certain industry, that should, of course, being an industry of writing, reflect the plurality of, the country that we live in. So I think that's really, really important. And I'm glad that you mentioned that as well. Thank you. I am going to cover all topics, not just this particular one, but I just wanted to ask one more thing. And I just want to say thank you also quickly to those putting questions in the Q&A. If you did join a little bit late, I just want to repeat that if you have any questions whilst we're talking, please put them in the Q&A and I'll come to them in the kind of audience question part. So thank you so much to those who have already put questions. I just wanted to briefly just reflect on this period that we recently had in the summer of a kind of greater, I suppose, awareness of issues of race in British culture brought about by Black Lives Matter. And something that I was very aware of was that we had this moment in which books by writers of colour, most often Black British and African American, but of course also beyond that, being valorised by some people as kind of routes for white people to understand the extreme racism of Western societies. And at the same time that these books were kind of being shared and people were encouraging each other to read them, there was also a critique from Black writers and writers of colour that there was an element of performativity in these reading lists, and that the Black texts were kind of being used as symbols rather than being really engaged with, which I do feel like potentially touches on some of the things that you've said about a writer being able to not only write what they want, but also that the complication and shades of grey of their work can be also kind of like brought into the conversation. And you know, just to quickly say, I was really interested by Breckner's comments in an interview with Bad Form. You know, the publishing industry seems stuck in a loop when it comes to issues of racism. Diversity and solidarity are constantly used as branding exercises. And I was just curious to get a response from any of you about what your experience was of that period, and whether you think that there are kind of contemporary tensions between, on the one hand, a potentially more openness to more diverse books, and of course that's not just in regard to race, that's also in regard to kind of lots of other, as Jacob said, minoritized identities, but also the tensions and how that plays into a kind of white supremacist capitalist perspective. And just your thoughts on that. I'm going to stop talking now.
No, it's interesting. Great. See, Emma is laughing at me, you know. Yeah, I can't contain myself, I know. Go ahead.
You should go, Jacob.
It gets me, look, this is, that question, Rebecca, is such a massive one. Okay, I'll try to answer it as briefly as I can within, you know, my own kind of framework, which is not necessarily definite.
We've lost you there, Jacob.
I'll start with the publishing so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. Sorry? I'm breaking up.
Oh, don't worry, it happens occasionally.
Okay, I think I need to turn off, I have two computers running here. I'm going to take one off. Yeah, okay. Right. It's a bit like what, you know, what we were hearing a bit earlier on. There are publishers who have an idea in their heads that there's only certain kinds of books that your average middle-class white female writer, she's a marketing model that they call Jane. And Jane is a white middle-class woman, middle-class middle-aged woman with disposable income who reads a lot. That's the model. That's the kind of archetypal thing that they have in their heads. And everything is seen through the lens of, would Jane like this? Would Jane know? It's not a real person. To the British public, right? Because these middle class people, white middle class males predominantly, but there are white middle class females in there too. They have these assumptions in their head about, you know, a British reader, Asian friends. I didn't believe it until he told it. Until she told me that they literally, when she brought her book, fantastic book, just said to her, look, you know, our readers wouldn't really, you know, go with this. Can you put a little bit of, you know, basically local color, a bit of masala, a bit of dance, a bit of that in it, because part of it was set in India. We want more local color, because the assumption is that a human story will not be on, in other words, it's playing to a stereotype. So there is that, there is that. There's also, this is the point I want to make. British history has for a very long time been hidden from, been distorted, right, from your average British person out there. Many of them don't know, I swear, they never heard all that stuff because they had been so closeted, which is why you have so much trauma over this narrative, like Dr. Corinne Fowler's book, Green on Pleasant Land. People want to kill the woman because she has come out and she's explaining the history in a language and saying all this wealth, all these people who come from other parts of the world, they are here because you were there, one, and two, it is not as innocuous and innocent as you really think that they are. So all this to say to you that there is a space for those kinds of narratives that where you have Black right, because these sales, that these phenomenal sales you're getting there, they are generated by some kind of curiosity. What is this all about, you know? Because a lot of people genuinely do not know. They do not know, they have not been exposed to it, because the people who control knowledge do not make that knowledge available. And you should, and they police it. You know, you listen to the Minister of Culture.
Sorry, Jacob, we lost you again.
To kind of respond to that. So, sorry, I'm going ahead. Yeah. Okay, so that's it. That's answered that part of it. There's a lot more that I can say, but you know, to be honest with you, there's a place. There's a place for that. I think. I honestly think so.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I wondered whether either of the editors of Hadja Press could potentially offer any thoughts in response to what Jacob said or to the original question.
I'll go quickly first. Yeah, so I think that that point was really like Hadja was obviously created around in a certain time, and we were seeing, you know, a lot of mainstream publishers kind of jump on the bandwagon. And it often happens that when something really, really bad takes place, there are these like flurry of reports and these like flurry of sales. And I think the point of that statement is that our stories aren't just important because they make you money. That was really the bottom line. And that was where our like frustration was coming from, that it wasn't like a sustained thing. There wasn't really like a structural approach to it. It was just like, oh, we've seen a spike in sales now, so we're just gonna kind of like ride this wave. And I think that's kind of what we wanted to do with Hadja, is say that, look, this is like for our communities. We're creating these books for our communities. We don't really like care about like what whether they're like, you know, selling at this time or not. It's just something that we wanted to do to archive and preserve these like really important stories.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. Emma, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think around last summer, I just ended up thinking, oh, we can't wait for the big publishers to just start and catch up. That it's just, yeah, I've been kind of obviously following all of the kind of attempts at big publishing to attempt to diversify the workforce, and it's just all so tiny, and I just think it's like barely a drop in the ocean, everything that needs to be done, starting with just London, although actually the pandemic and home working, maybe there's an great opportunity to change that, but will that happen? Who knows? So yeah, so I mean, I started off working in Hachette, so I did 2 years. This is one of the big five. We're talking about Hachette, Simon & Schuster, Macmillan, HarperCollins, and Penguin Random House. And so I kind of observed kind of corporate publishing, and in the end felt very frustrated with how my opportunities have been quite limited. And I felt it was the white men at the top who were kind of part of that. I guess it probably wasn't personal, but yeah, so I started off wanting to stick it to them and feeling very like, yeah, if they weren't going to do anything, I was going to do things. I was going to do all the things I wanted, and that was my original feeling that I've carried through. And so last summer I was just thinking, I need to do more. I need to do more and quicker and just, yeah, more numerous. And I mean, that kind of led it. So I did a lot of thinking. That was what I did last summer, and lots of thinking about how I could make the Emma Press even more of a weapon than I already feel like it is. And kind of the upshot of it was the kind of the concrete thing I thought, which I can do and I will do, is doing more calls for submissions. I feel like that's the thing. That was one of the other ways I was trying to break things down to start off with. I've always run quite a lot of calls for submissions. I'd slowed down a bit because I'd overwhelmed myself, but last summer I thought, okay, after getting the Arts Council funding, I had the opportunity to kind of slightly restructure the Emma Press. I could take on staff And instead of doing calls for manuscripts every other year, which was what was manageable, I'm going to do them more frequently. I think that will be a way to encourage people. So if they come across the Emma Press, they'll see that the next call is only a few months away. So if I do one every quarter, so I thought that's my theory, which I'm going to be trying out. So I thought I want to, yeah, and I'm so excited that there are so many new presses as well. There's many more places that people can send their work to and feel safe in. And so I want to be part of that just more. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Really interesting. Thank you so much. I think in these kind of Q&As, it's easy to kind of get whiplash because we move between so many different types of questions. But that was fascinating. Thank you all so much. And I just kind of wanted to move on to what I suppose I would describe as a more general question, though of course these things all intersect and interact with each other, which is to think about your experiences of publishing, which obviously we've already touched on. But something that I've been thinking about is obviously a lot of the audience members, so absolutely not all, are students, and there will also, of course, be aspiring, writers in the audience and aspiring publishers. And so I just wanted to kind of almost go back and wondered if you guys could tell us something about how you got into publishing and any advice you might have on starting out in publishing, especially in regard to working with, be that creating or working for an independent press. Just be really fascinating to kind of get your perspectives on that. So perhaps someone from Hadger Press could start us off, if that would be okay with you. Oh, sorry, just to repeat the question. I'm just curious, basically, about how you all got into publishing and any advice you would have on starting out in publishing, especially independent publishing, be that joining a pre-existing press or making your own. Just thoughts on kind of moving into that world in a way that feels true to you.
So I will just say how I got into publishing. I didn't really know that I wanted to work in publishing at all. I was more like I was involved in different activist groups at university, and I was reading a lot of books about politics, and I interviewed at a political publisher because I'd read all of their books, and then that's how I got into publishing. So it was through like a very different kind of avenue, I feel. And yeah, it's really hard, to be honest. I would say, yeah, actually for Hannah, do you want to go if you have any advice? I'm really struggling.
No, I hate this question. I hate giving advice on getting into publishing, not because I think people shouldn't do it, but just because it's a tough industry, even once you get in. And so I was very lucky. I applied for a paid internship at a nonfiction independent publisher when I finished university, and got this internship, which was for a couple of months, and then by a complete stroke of luck, a position opened up for an editorial assistant just as I was finishing my internship. And so I stayed on with them and worked for them for 4 and a bit years, I think, 4.5 years. Yeah, I had a really good experience. It's just difficult to know how to tell people to orchestrate that perfect situation that I had. I think that I'd probably, in terms of advice, I'd probably have more to say on setting up a press rather than getting into the industry. And that's basically just to say you can do it, which is something that I didn't think was possible. Even when I was working in publishing, and I mean, people are talking about imposter syndrome so much, but I think that it's kind of it's an industry that breeds it, because it's so hierarchical. You're working your way up a very steep ladder, and you kind of never really know if you're supposed to be there. So, and I just didn't really know at that time about people who kind of set up a press on their own. And I was just really lucky to meet Brecna, who, you know, we both just shared this vision entirely, which was just perfect. And we both had kind of similar experiences of working in the industry and saw similar lack. And yeah, we just did it. We'd never set up a kind of business before or anything. But in the process, we've met so many other people who are kind of running independent publishers. And it's just been amazing to see people who share similar vision to us in what they're doing and the work they're doing. And, you know, some of these people, we met somebody who's the director of a publishing house, an indie publishing house, who didn't even work in publishing before he set up. So I think he was a poet. And so it's really just, I would just tell people to go for it, and that it's a cruel industry, but it doesn't mean that you can't carve out your space to do something new and good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just to really quickly echo that, like, obviously the commercial pressures are hard and the competition is tough, but we were like blown away by the support that we had from other indie publishers. People were incredibly helpful. And I think that really, like, the help that we got from our communities through our crowdfunder, and the help that we got from other indie publishers in setting up was really transformative.
Thank you both so much. Emma, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a similar thing where it would be hard to kind of reverse engineer how I got my job in publishing as well. I'll share it with you. When I'm talking to students, I'll kind of explain it just to highlight the levels of privilege that got me there. So it's quite long though. I ended up getting a part-time short-term contract in Orion, which is part of Hachette, for ebook production control assistant. And so that was a very small job, and I was doing freelance copywriting at the time, so I was able to do it. So again, because I had the other stuff going on, I was able to take on this small job, and then my line manager quit because it was a frustrating role, and then I got promoted into ebook production controller. But the reason I heard about the job was because a girl in my year at university had done various long unpaid internships in the children's departments, and she told me about it. So I wouldn't have heard about that. And I hadn't planned to get into publishing at all because I knew that it did not pay well. And I guess it only occurred to me that I would work, that editorial would be a thing to do in publishing, but it didn't occur to me that production existed. So I kind of, lots of things happened. And then I ended up in the production and design department. And actually that's where I learned exactly everything I needed to be able to go on and start my own press. So it worked out well, but yeah, I feel kind of embarrassed almost. And like that's, a lot of things happened. There's very little kind of intention behind it. It was just something came up and then it worked well. I never thought I would start a business, but then I turned out to really enjoy it. And so lots of discoveries and happenstances.
Thank you so much. And that's really interesting. And I think we've obviously touched on starting a press, which I think is so interesting. And I think we're going to go back to that in the audience questions, because, obviously, that journey is so fascinating. Thank you. Jacob, did you have any thoughts on this that you wanted to add, just in regard to kind of carving a place for oneself within independent publishing? If not, that's also totally fine.
Not much, except that it's not easy, but it's worth it. And prepared to be a factotum. In other words, you'll put out the bins, you'll make yourself your own coffee, you'll talk to the printers, you may even have to do your own design and layout, and be prepared to peddle your books to begin with. You go to book fairs, you try to sell your books, and you do it because you're convinced that it's important.
Thank you so much. I have so many questions written down that it's embarrassing, but we cannot get through them all. So, because I really want to move on to audience questions, though obviously, I'll return to it if we have time. But what I wanted to do is give everyone a chance for a very quick break. We already have some fantastic questions in the Q&A box, which I'm really looking forward to sharing with the panelists. If anyone watching either has a question they want to write in now or in the break wants to write anything, please feel free. We will come back, you know, the briefest break, if we come back at maybe 6 minutes past 7. You don't have to do anything. Just going to turn off our cameras and turn off our microphones and come back. Same if you're in the audience. Please don't leave and come back. You won't be able to get back in. Just turn off your camera and mute yourself. Okay, that's it. I will see you all at the confusing time of 6 minutes past 7. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. So hopefully everyone is filtering back in. Hello, hello. And soon we can start answering some audience questions. Okay. Thank you all on the panel for being here for the second half. Hope you manage to get a glass of water and whatever you need. So I'm going to dive into the questions as quickly as I can because we have lots. Thank you so much, everyone. I will obviously put as many as I possibly can to the panel. So this question, I think, is mainly for Emma, Farhana, and Breckner. And it says, hi, I'm actually I won't read all questions word for word, but this one I will. Hi, we are a newly launched indie publisher called Fox and Windmill, based in Bradford, publishing works from South Asian writers in the North. It's so inspiring seeing such incredible diversity in the indie publishing community. I would love to know from everyone, what are some things that you wish you knew when you established your company? Is there anything that you wish you did differently? Yeah, Emma, Farhana or Breckner, if you would want to dive in.
Yeah, I can go. Yeah, I saw this in the Q&A and I was thinking about it. I think one thing I wish I had done was I did a lot of overcompensating, and so I think I've been going for maybe nine years now, and I've probably been overcompensating for big publishers for maybe 7 of those years. I guess if you start a press with a very specific purpose, a mission, and an agenda, then it's really easy to define yourself against the things you do not want to be, or the things you're trying to resist or to dismantle. And that's really important, but I think you can also really exhaust yourself. So again, going back to my original thing, the original thing I was saying about trying to be enough, I'm still trying to believe that in myself, but I think looking back and feeling kind of older and slightly wiser, I think actually just doing the things, existing, trying to do more, that's enough. And realistically, I wasn't going to transform the whole of the publishing industry just through publishing more books. So I think I want to keep that feeling, but not try to do everything I possibly can. So I guess, for example, some years I published 20 books, and I've been doing that without staff. I've had some freelancers sometimes, but it's just been me really. And some years I published 20 books. I think one year I might publish 26 books, and I'd say an okay amount of books for me to publish would have been maybe 10 to 12. That would have been manageable. So I published way more because I was trying to give more people opportunities, trying to do more, and that was too much. And that was maybe the maximum I physically could do or mentally could do, but it was way too much. So that's quite a bleak warning from the future, but I would say just by starting a press, that's really great, and to take care of yourself.
Thank you, Emma. Farhana or Breckner, or indeed both, any thoughts on this question?
I haven't got thoughts yet, but just thank you for that advice, Emma. Very much taking it on board.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, that is precious advice. I look back on the last year, and Farhana and I have been like burnt out at some point. So really great advice.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, well, the next question, I'm trying to put these in thematic kind of blobs, but yeah, that's somewhat challenging. But yeah, another question that we had here from Ashley is how, and that would be to any of you if you have thoughts on this, how complete should a piece of writing be before you'll consider taking it forward with that writer? So I suppose the question is just, to what extent do you want to read a finished product from a writer, and to what extent do you want to read something still in flux that you'll then kind of work with them on? Anyone have thoughts on that? Yeah, Jacob, please. You're muted, Jacob.
Yeah, that's telling me something. It depends really, because I have been known to work, for example, with a writer for a period of 6 months to a year. But why? Because there's something about the manuscript they've sent in which is quite arresting. So it could be the thematic, the matter, the subject matter, the premise of the book, so to speak. I did one last year with a writer who was writing about the impact of climate change, for example, on the islands of the Caribbean. That's a perspective which is extremely rare in fiction. So we knew that it was an important book, seeing the world from the point of view of a Caribbean person living on one of these Caribbean islands. And we spent about 6 to 8 months working on that book. There's another writer, again, from another island in the Caribbean, who we just knew that this person had enormous talent and ability, but was just wild and had to be reined in, you know. And it was my job to kind of have that relationship with him. And 5 6 years later, we proved right. He's just sold this book, massive kind of book deal. So it for us it depends on the writer, but now I think this is the great paradox of a certain kind of success, um, that we have so many manuscripts coming in, we have so many manuscripts to read, that you just don't have that kind of time to give to writers anymore. Although Peepal Tree Press has two arms, one is called the Inscribed Writers thing, where and another one is called the Readers and Writers Group, and a lot of work, developmental work, is spent with these writers, mentoring them and so on. But there's no guarantee that their manuscript is going to arrive at Peepal Tree Press. So it's quite possible, because books have been bought on the basis of the first 30,000 words by some publishers. But it has to be really, really strong.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else like to respond? Maybe just one more response, if anyone has thoughts on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we're probably a little bit unusual in that we're really happy to see something at a very, very early stage of development. What is kind of important to us is that we can see the thinking behind what you're trying to do, and that kind of purpose, the reason that you're writing is very clear, and then a sort of structure of how the manuscript is going to be shaped, and then obviously a substantial section of sample writing as well. But I mean, some people prefer to completely try as best they can to perfect something before sending it to a publisher. We respect that, but we don't need you to do that. And I think that both Bracken and I see ourselves as very collaborative with writers. That's kind of one of the benefits of being an indie press for both the author and the publisher, is that you get to put so much attention and energy into making each book as best as it can be. So yeah, we're really happy with just a sort of simple proposal and then some sample writing.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, and I think that probably is quite true of the indie press experience. I mean, yes, they're all different, but there's, as you say, that intimacy in the relationship, the collaborative relationship that's kind of forged. A quick question that is specifically for Emma. Someone wanted to know what kind of poetry that you're looking to publish right now. What are you searching for and looking for specifically within poetry?
I mean, I would say it's the same as always. It's poetry that I really like, and that's very broad, but there is just a thing I'm looking for, and every time I do a call for submissions I have to try and define it, and it's very difficult. but again, that's the kind of the premise. That's why it's the Emma Press. It's things that I like, and I feel like maybe I feel like maybe it's not being published elsewhere, but equally maybe it is, and I just particularly like this example of it. So I'd say I have a very broad taste for styles of writing, say from extremely experimental to extremely kind of formal and traditional and everything in between. And then the only other thing they have in common is just that I feel something. So I just think, oh yes, that's really cool. And yeah. And so I'd be happy if I see someone who's written something and maybe it's at an earlier stage, then I would work with them, because that is quite rare to see something that's both cool and written very well. So I'm looking for the writing and then something about what they're writing about. I guess it will chime at some sort of, it feels like it dings, and it's a nice feeling. And so that's where I get quite mystical about it. And I realize that's frustrating for people who are wanting to know, but I feel like if you have some sort of feeling about the Emma Press, then it might be reciprocated. I think because there is that feeling of affinities, then I hope it works that way. And I think, judging by what people are like, who's sent stuff in, I think that there must be something to that, because I do get lots of things which kind of are in that area, and then the ones that are just spot on, then I take.
I might, if it's okay with you, Emma, not to tie you out, but follow up with another question that's specifically for you, which is in regard to the quite kind of a rare thing that you do, which is publishing fiction pamphlets. And the question here is, how do you best describe the medium of the pamphlet for fiction? Is there a usual content length, for example? How do you market them? How do you market such a kind of, an unusual form?
Yeah, so there's, I've been doing prose pamphlets, as I call them, since quite early on, because really, so I publish a lot of poetry, and the Emma Press is very poetry, but really I'm more of a prose person, kind of secretly, and so that's been my passion thing I've done along kind of more slowly, I guess, as I've been kind of learning the ropes of it. But it's the same theory behind the poetry pamphlets, which I publish a lot of, which is that I want to introduce people to writers, and I feel like a longer book is more of a commitment, and maybe you don't necessarily get that satisfaction if you've kind of dipped in, you haven't finished it. So, but also I guess I see the Emma Press as a platform for people to go on, and that's sometimes, I don't know, maybe it feels hard, but overall I feel really good when the authors go on to be published elsewhere with bigger collections, with their full-length things, because I want to play that role of finding people, but also supporting people if they want to stay in the pamphlet form, and that's also great. But I expect them to go on to bigger things. So I see the pamphlet as a really good tool for that, a really good weapon for giving people a platform, saying, yes, I think this is great. And I guess another kind of measure of success is that I want it to mean something to be an Emma Press author for the bigger publishers, whether I respect them or not. I want them to think, oh, this person's been published by the Emma Press. I'll take a look at what they're doing, or like an agent, or anyone else, or a festival booker, a workshop booker. I want that to mean something, and then I feel like I'll have contributed.
That's so interesting, thank you. Another kind of couple of questions which are about, I suppose, publishing kind of in a practical sense, really. And there's a question that I think we often, get, whether it be to writers or to publishers, which is, and this is for all of you, do most of your writers have an agent? And do you think as indie presses that having an agent is important? Anyone sort of feel a burning desire to speak on this? I don't know if you, go for it, Emma.
It's rare. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, I would say most of my authors don't, and I kind of prefer if they don't, because it just involves quite a lot of paperwork, and it feels like, because I'm publishing pamphlets and previously anthologies, so I'm stopping the anthologies. Feels like overkill. It's really annoying to have to deal with an agent over one poem in an anthology, and then also, I don't know, it's happened recently where I guess when I've been taking on authors, I'm thinking I'm going to be dealing with this number of extra people, and then if they all turn out, or even a few of them turn out to have agents, then it's sort of doubling the number of people I was thinking I would be dealing with, and it's just that relationship. It's an extra relationship. So I guess just for the kind of books I publish, I'm not that keen. Overall, for big publishers, I think you do need an agent. You need someone to help you and to get you seen. I think for indie presses, sometimes feels like overkill.
That's really interesting. And Jacob, were you going to add to that?
Yeah, well, I echo what Emma's just said. Now, within relatively recent times, we've had approaches by agents, and being a small press, I'm sure again we can all attest to this. You haven't got lots of money sloshing around, and agents tend, quite rightly, to want to maximize as much money they can get from a publisher. And recently, we received an offer from a writer we published before by an agent, and it was just, for us, it may be small money for a big publisher, but for us it was pretty astronomical, and we just had to decline from getting the book. But generally speaking, I would say more than 95% of the writers that we work with, they don't come to us because they want massive, advances. They come to us because they want to be published by a very good press that has over the years worked for and acquired a reputation for quality. We have a big website called Submittable, through which one submit one's work, and it's essentially my job usually to sit and pass through the ones that I think are viable and then pass it on to the managing editor. Um, yeah, my recent book that we had, and I think this is interesting, was the book by Monique Roffrey, The Mermaid of Black Conch, which won the Costa Prize this year. She'd been turned down by literally every big publisher out there. Yeah, because the algorithms probably just said, well, based on her past 4 or 5 excellent books, we're not going to make any money out of it. And we saw the book. She had an agent, but and Peepal Tree Press now, the managing director, Jeremy Pointing, has decided that we are at a stage now where we can pay a small advance if the writer wants to take it. If not, we decline. But that book turned up, and we offered the usual. Peepal Tree Press offered the usual, something quite small. It wasn't at all any big advance. It's a standard advance if we could afford it. And look at what's happened. It's become one of the biggest books of fiction for this year so far. And that's because it was turned down by publishers for reasons which I think are really interesting. They became victims of their own models, where it's a book that is not, it's a different book from the Caribbean by a writer who wrote a book in the Caribbean, and somehow the English reader, Jane, wouldn't like it. Well, they learned a lesson. Now Jane is buying it up and can't stop buying it. So,
Thank you, Jacob. Oh no, please go on.
Just to quickly add to that and echo what both of you have said, yeah, most of Hajar's writers won't have an agent, and I think the reason for that is who we've published. I mean, we're in the early stages of our press, but who we've published so far and who we will publish, usually they are first-time writers, and those writers usually don't have an agent, and we don't want to be that kind of press that goes after writers that have like 1 million Twitter followers or anything like that. So it means that they won't have agents. We have nothing against working with agents, but it just so happens that the kind of work that we're publishing means they usually don't.
Thank you, that's really interesting. I've got a series of questions here, which are just, I suppose, engaging with kind of different elements of minoritization, as Jacob was saying, and obviously these are just such huge questions that we can never have time to fully address. But someone was just really interested in kind of what you all have a sense of in regard to the difficulties for those with mental health issues, and how mental health, obviously, especially chronic mental health, can be a barrier to reaching out to publishers and to having the confidence to kind of work in these, spaces, and whether you have a sense of kind of anything that can be done, that is being done, but also maybe, and I'm paraphrasing here from the question, what needs to be done to make those spaces more open to mentally ill and kind of neurodivergent people. Anyone have thoughts on that would like to come in?
Well,
yeah, Emma.
Go ahead, Emma.
Well, I don't really have anything very helpful, except for I think probably working in a big publisher it's not a very good environment for your mental health. I think there's a lot of very long hours, a lot of expectation of kind of working beyond your hours, and something I've thought a lot about because I just got staffed as part of the Arts Council project. So for the last month, I've been training them up and thinking a lot about what the working environment of the Emma Press will be and what kind of ethos I want, and just explaining all of their attitudes. And it's been quite an interesting exercise with all the stuff which is just me, so it's just my attitude towards myself, and then opening it out and explaining it. And one of the really big things is just kind of, you do not work past your hours. And I think there can sometimes be quite a bunker mentality in big publishing where somehow everything has kind of expands into huge stakes. Everyone's kind of very, very stressed and just kind of tense all the time. So yes, it's not. So for advice of support, I don't know. I just really hope that that kind of home working and flexible working, I feel like that's got to be a really big part of it. And I hope that the pandemic will at least force big publishers to address that, and just to address about getting work in publishing. It's just that I feel like there aren't that many jobs out there, and that's just really tough. There are mostly in London. There are a few dotted around in a few cities, but it's overall it's a really tough landscape. So sorry, I don't have anything more helpful, but yes.
Yeah.
No, not at all. Thank you, Emma. Sorry, go on, Jacob.
I was going to ask you, what, are you talking about writers with mental health, or?
Well, it would be really interesting to hear that perspective as well. Writers with
so
kind of mental health and sort of neurodivergence trying to, find a space for their writing as well.
I'll be very honest with you. Some of the best writers I have worked with as a tutor and as a mentor are writers who have self-declared mental health problems, because quite often so many of them write from that space, and the writing is absolutely incredible. I can attest to so many of them. Even just recently, I've done an anthology with people who have major, kind of significant mental health issues, and what comes out is absolutely incredible. In fact, there aren't many writers I know of who so-called great writers I know of who don't have some kind of little demon, somewhere in the back of their minds and stuff. So and the important thing is being able to accommodate that. Sometimes it's temperament, sometimes it's a bad day, and you as an editor, you are the other end of the phone, you take it, but you want the book, because it's a good book, and you're prepared to wait, and so yeah. But in terms of my own mental health, well, I'm a lost case anyway, so lost cause, so one doesn't worry too much about that, does one?
Thank you, Jacob. And I think it's interesting that sort of circles back a little bit to what Breckner, Fahana and Emma were talking about in regard to community and the relationship with writers, that potentially working with the indie press might be a slightly healthier working relationship for someone who is struggling with mental health, because of that intimacy. I'm going to zoom on, even though I know there's so much to say about this, because there's also been a question about your thoughts as panelists on ageism and the kind of difficulty for older first-time authors, so those kind of 60 plus, in finding a foothold as writers in the industry. And this isn't in the question, but I'm just kind of adding to that, what you think, if anything, is being done, and what could potentially be done to make it to make more possibilities for different writers. And if any of you have kind of particular thoughts on what you're doing as individual presses to work with older writers, that would obviously be really interesting to hear. Anyone have thoughts on this?
We have loads of 50 plus, all the way. We have a lot of people. We have writers even in the 80s, who, and they are among the best that we have, because they bring something that younger writers can't or don't bring to their work, which is experience and maturity and insight and a certain kind of wisdom that you just, very few younger writers have.
I would add to that. Sorry. I think, again, indie presses are probably a nicer space for that. So I feel like, because, I don't think there's such an emphasis on kind of being the hot new young thing, because we're doing something else. We all have different things we're trying to do with our presses. I know there's a lot of talk in the poetry community about there being, there are some prizes for poets under 30, and I think, so there obviously are some institutions which will raise up kind of younger writers, and I think there's been some work done to try and set up prizes for people who start writing later. I guess from a publisher's point of view, because these are all things that poets enter themselves, so I don't really think about them so much. I guess I'm mostly trying to make sure that my submissions process is very clear, and it's definitely not about finding, not even debut writers. I guess that's one of the main things in doing, is that the poetry pamphlets, they can be for debuts of any age, or they could be for people in the middle of their career, if they want to, they're trying something else. So they might kind of do a sidestep and do a pamphlet. That's another really great thing for pamphlets. You can experiment and do a sequence or a series of essays or something. So I hope that I'm trying not to take part in this thing of you have to start in your early 20s and make a splash, and then you might be abandoned by publishers in your mid-career stage. And yeah, it's quite a grim trajectory. So I want to be outside of that.
Thank you, Emma. Farhana and Bracknell, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Don't worry if not. But...
I have something really quick. I mean, so yeah, because we've just started out, we've only got 6 authors. We don't currently have any older authors, but we're obviously very, we really hope that we will in future. And I think what Emma just said about how, a lot of the industry is sort of about just having people start in their 20s, and if they don't kind of become a success then they're kind of ditched. We would obviously hate for that to happen with any of the authors who we've already commissioned. And Emma, I think you said at the beginning that some of your authors you've kind of published again, and I think Jacob, you said the same. And we'd really like to kind of have that almost lifelong relationship with our authors. But another thing that I just wanted to quickly mention is that before we had commissioned any books, we kind of, as part of our ethos or as part of what we kind of set out to commission, we've always kind of been really excited by documenting kind of intergenerational stories, and it just so happens that in our first list those are all from the perspective of young people and their kind of parents and grandparents' stories, but obviously that can be kind of from older generations too, and even in terms of the writing in our books, we're really firmly against kind of italicizing or explaining kind of things that are written in other languages than English, and things like that. So we're just very open to kind of all sorts of writing styles which might kind of be able to capture oral history and things more, or spoken word, which I hope does kind of attract older writers too.
Thank you so much. That's really fascinating. Another question. We've talked a little bit about the kind of London-centric nature of publishing, but there's also a question here about giving Northern voices a platform, and also the relationship between the way in which Northern voices are giving a platform within a kind of, I assume from the question, reading between the lines, a relatively kind of narrow focus on a kind of working class Northern cliche, and that being the only kind of Northern voice that is perhaps centered. Just your thoughts really on increasing Northern representation in publishing. I know that Jacob, obviously Peepal Tree is based in Leeds, so we have a Northern publisher here, but if anyone wants to reflect on that, would be really interesting.
Oh, I can jump in. I think it goes back to just, I think there needs to be more small presses. I think we can't wait for the big publishers. I mean, they've said they'll have like little regional offices, and I don't know, I just don't feel like very much has happened. And even if they do put a few people in a few places, that's not really the same as having publishers embedded across the country. So there are small presses. I think there's quite a good spread across the UK. So I would say again, maybe look to the indie presses to begin with, because it might be less dispiriting and you might feel less pigeonholed.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. I'm actually just going to move on to another question. I know you could all speak really interestingly about this because we're running out of time, but yeah, absolutely. There's an amazing, obviously, indie press scene in the North, of which Peepal Tree is part. So that's really interesting. Another question here about how you think independent publishers can harness the reach of Amazon to achieve their own objectives. Is that possible? Can indie presses have a productive relationship with Amazon, or is it always just something which is going to lead to kind of negative outcomes in all directions?
I think I'll just say something very quickly, and I'd be very interested in hearing what the other panelists say about this. So when Farhana and I started Hajar, from very early on, we made the decision to not work with Amazon, and instead to focus on our subscription model, which we felt made it easier for us to actively build a community around our list, and to work directly with independent publishers, not independent publishers, independent bookstores, to stock the books. So that's kind of how we've been going forward with it. We feel like Amazon in general has had an incredibly damaging impact on the industry as the main buyer of books, how it controls discounts, how it can just kind of punitively turn off a buy button, or sell only from third-party sellers. And so we kind of felt like, it would be really great to build some a precedent of being a successful publisher and not working with Amazon.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? Or go for it.
Something has to give. Something has to break. That this Amazon trend is a culmination of a trend that began in the 70s, and the kind of market capitalism that has been brought to books and that have been brought to the buying and the selling of books. Amazon wants to, and I would even say is controlling the book market, full stop. They have moved from a point. I've watched the evolution. Somebody should do a PhD on that. I've watched how Amazon has moved from a very tentative enterprise to becoming not just dominant, but quite demanding, okay? And right now they will tell you what they want, what they don't want. They will order a pallet of 20,000 books. They don't give a damn whether or not you have the capacity to produce those books. They want the books, and they want the books by XYZ date. And but that didn't begin with Amazon. That goes a long way back with this.
We lost you there for a moment.
Into these sort of into 5 big things. But I would suggest that I have always been a strong proponent of what I call the Canada model. Somebody in Canada, the government level, got very clever, and they realized that a proper publishing infrastructure and a proper book distribution, a democratic one, would have to involve a proliferation of small independent publishers. So they really encourage that. And this is where most of the interesting work is coming from, point 1. And point 2, people are very conscious. It's a bit like, Farhana, your decision that you've made on Hager Press, you've made about not buying from Amazon. There are people who will on principle not buy from Amazon because they understand the implications of that for independent booksellers. So they move away from that hegemony. And I think we need to actually be that conscious here. Does Peepal Tree Press, and here's why I'm a hypocrite, and that's not but does Peepal Tree Press distribute its book through Amazon? Yes, it does. Why? Because, we have to live at one level, we have to kind of earn, but I do think that Peepal Tree Press is beginning now, especially with the opportunities presented by online sales, and so beginning to replicate, not replicate so much as, a kind of online marketing. And I hope that goes better and better, and that gets better and better. Because Amazon will swallow us all up. If we become commercially viable, they will buy us and sell us at a discount as humans. Trust me. And you can quote me on that in public.
Thank you so much, Jacob. We are going to have to finish, so I'm going to just kind of perhaps slightly naughtily grab onto one last question, because I hope it is a relatively contained one, which is for Hager Press specifically. And the question is, your website has playlists on for some of the books. And the questioner says, I've never seen this before and I think it's brilliant. What was the thinking behind this? It's a nice place of positivity to end on, and love for your press.
Yeah, I'm so glad that they picked up on that. So this is something that Farhana and I were super excited about when we had this idea back a few months ago, and it was from reading Sarah's poetry collection, which comes out tomorrow. And in that collection, she has this one poem that's based on a playlist, and we thought, this is incredible. We should have playlists with all of our books. And so on before the beginning of the book, each book we ask author to contribute a Spotify playlist that readers can put on as they start the book and listen to as they read it. And yeah, we just loved the idea. We felt like it was a lot of fun for our authors. Our authors were pretty excited about it too. And it's just really nice to see that kind of, we were thinking about how different forms of art interact with each other, and the kind of things that come out of that, the beautiful things that come out of that. And it was very much along those lines that we thought this would be a great idea.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a really fantastic idea. It's a really exciting thing to do. I'm going to have to finish for reasons of fairness to our panelists and to our audience. But I just want to say really sorry for those of you who I didn't have time to ask your questions. If any of you are York St John people and you want to send me your question in email, I'm sure our panelists would potentially be open to thinking through if there are specific questions about their practice. But that is for another day. Thank you to everyone so much for attending and spending your evening with us, and really thank you profoundly to Jacob, Emma, Farhana and Brackner. It's been such a pleasure to hear you all speak, and it feels like a real privilege to be kind of working within literature at a time when all of you are kind of innovating and bringing such important kind of forms of publishing, but also just amazing books, to us as readers. So thank you, and thank you for spending your time with us.
Thank you for thanking me, and lovely to meet you, ladies. It's just a wonderful experience, Hope to see you all again sometimes on Zoom or somewhere, and good luck, good fortune. Any kind of support you guys need that doesn't involve work, drop me a line.
Thank you. And thanks, Rebecca, for organizing.
Blessings. And yes, Rebecca, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, it's been a joy. All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you to our audience and to Leanne Roberts for helping us organise. Goodbye.